You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
Yahweh is the creator God, the ruler of the universe, the maker of everything existing before anything else ever existed. Israel is not doomed to the consequences of their own failure, but because they have this status accorded by the Lord, which takes into account his name, the implications of his name and those plans, and the fact that he hasn't changed his mind, and he still called them. Yeah, he still called them. They're still his.
There's no denying that Israel messed up time after time after time. It's clear that they are a chosen people, but that doesn't make them perfect. In today's message, Pastor Ken reminds us that God doesn't use perfect people because He is the only one who's perfect. When Israel messed up, God didn't suddenly change His mind. They are still called to be His people. When you mess up, that doesn't mean that God is suddenly done with you. He wants to help you pick up the pieces along the way. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah, chapter 48, as he continues his message, We Have Met the Enemy, and He is Us.
Because of the fact that the people are so stubborn, and God has made his revelation through prophecy, and he did it intentionally, he had to do it to prevent his own people from saying, our idols told us this. We know from the courtroom scenes earlier that God has already gone to the lengths to prove that the idols, the false gods, the fallen divine angels, divine beings, they're not divine anymore, they're fallen angels, they can't predict the future. In fact, when God says, come on, go ahead, do it, they can't. They're incapable of telling the future. They're going to try. You know, that's why I love getting three psychics together and ask the same question and you get three different answers. It's fun. They can't tell the future. Not at all. God knew that by the time they'd go into exile, the people would be so far down the rabbit hole of idolatry, and they are, that they would say anything to stay away from the truth. And you know, we see that even today. That's why Jesus tells us not to be deceived. That's the number one thing that he tells the church for the last days. Don't be deceived. In Matthew 24, as he's sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately and said, tell us when these things will happen. What's the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And before Jesus says anything else, he says, watch out that no one misleads you. Do you think that we have deception going on around us today? Yeah, constantly. And I did a little bit of study on this thing called deception, and self-deception is rather interesting too. But it's generally an accepted fact that to deceive is to make someone believe what's untrue. It logically implies that self-deception is deceiving yourself as to your true feelings, motives, circumstances, and actions so that you actually believe what's false. So here are the steps to deceive yourself. And these are, I find, very interesting. Researchers say that there are 4 criteria that have to have simultaneously to deceive yourself. 1, you have to have 2 contradictory beliefs, okay? So in other words, I love the Lord, or the Lord has told me that I have to keep myself pure, or I'm not supposed to marry or be involved with someone who's not a Christian. But you can't make ugly cute. And that cute guy does not love the Lord, but he is cute. So I'm going to get him saved. So contradictory, yeah. I'm not supposed to be unequally yoked, but that's a good-looking guy. And he's not a believer. And you hold both of these beliefs at the same time. So that's the second point. You have to hold both these beliefs at the same time. But only one is subject to awareness. So what's the one that's subject to awareness over a period of time? He's cute, or she's pretty. And the state of non-awareness, that is the choice of what the individual chooses not to think about, don't be unequally yoked, is intentional. You intentionally forget about that. So in other words, it's called cognitive dissonance as a lifestyle. People do that all the time, not just over being unequally yoked, and that's just an easy example, but they do it about all sorts of things. God says we're supposed to worship him primarily and solely above anything else. But it's a pretty day to go to the beach. And, the kids have got soccer, and we find all kinds of things as excuses to not do what the Lord asks us to do. We do it all the time. So is it wrong? No, we're just being like the folks in Judah. Yeah, it is wrong. It's called sin. Solomon's right, though, as we start looking at this, there's nothing new under the sun. There isn't. Cognitive dissonance was going on in Judah. It's going on today. They just didn't call it that. We call it that today. Or we call it situational ethics. I'm not supposed to do this and say bad things about this person. However, he said bad things about me, so I'm going to say bad things about him. That's not in the Bible. So Judah's without excuse. They know about the greatness and the power of God, but they only have this image and no reality, okay? So verses 6 to 8, you've heard look at all this, and will you not declare it? I proclaim to you new things from this time, even hidden things which you've not known. They're created now and not long ago, and before today you have not heard them, so that you will not say, behold, I knew them. You haven't heard because you haven't known. Even from long ago, your ear has not been open because I knew that you would deal very treacherously, and you've been called a rebel from birth. That's not good news. The discussion is becoming very pointed here. Look at everything Yahweh's done for his people. He saved them from Egypt. He brought them out. He hasn't left them in the dark. He's given them prophets. He's told them everything that's coming. They've heard about a guy named Emmanuel who's coming. They've heard about this child that's going to be born of a virgin. They've heard all of this. They've not been left in the dark. They should know. Yahweh has proclaimed things to them in the past about the future, things that they're seeing coming to pass. Remember, he said he was going to take care of the Assyrians, and they would never even fire an arrow in the city, and they didn't. And have they remembered that? Maybe, maybe not. God is actually, it almost sounds like he's incredulous at their unbelief. I mean, there's several times that Jesus actually marveled at their unbelief, how people just didn't get it. They didn't understand. It makes it sound like faith is something that's simple, and we just can't see it. Why can't we see it? Because Satan's blinding us, he's lying to us, he's deceiving us, and he doesn't want us to see it. So everything's been done for them and told to them, and they should be out proclaiming this truth, and they're not. And now he's preparing to tell them new things through Isaiah. I mean, we're coming up on the chapter 50 and 51 and 52 and 50. We're going to be hearing about Jesus here pretty quick. He's talking to them like they're in Babylon. So that's where they're ultimately going to be. He's not going to tell them anything else about Cyrus, but they have everything they need to know. But he will mention them again. And when he says, look at all this, he sees the prophecy is fulfilled. He's seeing it's already done. In fact, a lot of prophecy, when you read it in the Hebrew, is past tense, like it's already happened. They should be proclaiming this, that they have a God who tells the future before it ever happens. They're not. They're not. His people have disregarded all the previous prophecies, so God's going to give new ones. They're about to find out that, yes, God's wrath is indeed coming, but it's going to be delayed. And there will be another person who will free them from captivity. There'll be this, once again, they'll hear they're going to be delivered. They're going to be freed from captivity so they can come back from home. And they're still trying to struggle with that too. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, Israel always knew they'd come back to the land after captivity, if they were reading it. And their dwelling in the land was assured by the Abrahamic covenant, but now that Isaiah is giving prophecies, they didn't know how God was going to deliver them. They can't feel smug. They can't feel like they're doing their own thing and setting themselves free. God's going to do this because of his grace. It's that simple. There's no way that they can save themselves. So we come to verse 9. For the sake of my name, I delay my wrath. And for my praise, I restrain it for you, in order not to cut you off. Behold, I've refined you, but not as silver. I've tested you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake, I will act. How can my name be profaned and my glory I will not give to another? Does it sound like God's frustrated with them? Does to me, okay? What is the primary reason why God has delayed his judgment on his people? If you read the book of Exodus, on numerous occasions, he tells Moses, get out of the way, let me zap them. Let me zap them now. I'll make a nation of you. Just let me kill them all. And he talks them out of it. Well, he's a picture of Jesus Christ, and that's why this is all going on. It's an example for us. But God delays his judgment because of his name. It's because of who he is. It's kind of like, well, what? And Moses reminded him of this more than once. He said, well, what will they say when they find out that you killed all the Egyptian army, you brought them all out to the desert and zapped them, and then you, no, that just won't work, Lord. And God said, well, yeah, that's right. You're more interested in my name. Okay, great, no problem. He's getting from Moses what he was expecting, a picture of Jesus Christ. God is not going to do anything that will compromise his name to the nations at all, ever. Earlier in the courtroom, he's with the nations. There's this discussion about things to come and that he's going to provide salvation for them, for the nations. And he remains consistent with his nature and his promises. And it's not the first time either. I mean, you go and look at Ezekiel. Ezekiel is written, they're in exile. Ezekiel is a prophet in Babylon. And the Lord's talking through Ezekiel. And all of a sudden the discussion is what was going on in Egypt before they got delivered. It says this, I said to them, each of you must get rid of the detestable idols you keep before you, and do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. But they rebelled against me and refused to listen to me. No one got rid of their detestable idols, nor did they abandon the idols of Egypt. Then I decided to pour out my rage on them and fully vent my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. I acted for the sake of my reputation so I would not be profaned before the nations among whom they lived, before whom I revealed myself by bringing them out of the land of Egypt. God was consistent with who he was. He had told Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, I'm going to bring them out of the land and bring them back to Canaan. And even though it says here, I wanted to zap them, he didn't do it because he's consistent with his promises and with what he has already said. I like that because he's made a lot of promises to us too. Prior to bringing his people out of Egypt, Israel had an idol problem. In Ezekiel, there's discussion about that. And then on the table, for discussion and consideration is getting rid of them. But again, he made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he didn't want this impact on the surrounding nations. His goal is redemption of the entire planet. The nations worshiped the no-gods at this time, and the no-gods were busy promulgating all these mythologies that these no-gods are vindictive gods that will just go and zap you. I mean, all you have to do is read Greek mythology. They're constantly taking out people all over the place. Yahweh's not like that. He's going to take the long view regarding the nations and their perceptions of who he is and how he operates. He's going to show he's a God of love, not Zeus. His goal is redemption of the world, and that's accomplished through Jesus Christ. We see that in Luke 19:10. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. It doesn't say the Son of Man came to seek and destroy the lost. It doesn't say that. John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. He doesn't say, God so loved the world that he zapped them. Doesn't say that. He is interested in redemption. God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned. Whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he's not believed in the name of the only Son of God. So we come to verse 10. Behold, I've refined you, but not as silver. I've tested you in the furnace of affliction. In the next 150 years, events are going to take place in Judah that'll eventually culminate with the nation being taken exiled to Babylon, most of the folks being killed, many taken into captivity, and they're going to live in another country for 70 years. Most people believe that should be the end of the nation. But here the Lord is telling them in advance, that's not the case. You're going to come back. And by the way, they came back a second time too. And they were declared a nation in 1948. Now, yes, they're going to be disciplined, but they won't be destroyed. They're going to be afflicted so that they'll come to their senses and come back to Yahweh. Discipline is a sign of love. It is not a sign of hatred or zapping or anything like that. We get more of this in Hebrews chapter 12, and for us as New Testament believers, talking about divine discipline. The writer of Hebrews says, as you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. Who ever heard of a child who's never disciplined by its father? If God doesn't discipline you as he does all of his children, it means that you're illegitimate and you're not really his child at all. Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best that they knew how. But God's discipline is always good for us so that we might share in his holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterwards, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. I've got to admit to you, every time I found myself being disciplined by the Lord, I've never sat back and go, praise the Lord, I'm being disciplined. I find myself praying, Lord, help me to learn the lesson so I never have to go through this again. That's where we should be. Here in verses 9 to 11, God is talking to those who are going to be disciplined in Babylon. For those in exile, yeah, God's disciplining them, but they're not done. It's not the end. In verse 11, he promises that for his name's sake, he will rescue them from exile in Babylon. And he's telling this in advance because he said, I'm not going to give my glory to anybody else. I'm just not going to. When God becomes the patron for the nation of Israel, it's a difficult position because, first of all, he knows they're sinners. He knows we're sinners. If he supports and protects them, even though they're betraying him, that doesn't work. He risks being mocked and despised by the world, but he chooses to love them anyhow. If he punishes them, he risks being thought demonic. So God walks this tightrope through his association with Israel, but he also does that with us. He disciplines us. Judgment's complete, but he won't let the idols take credit for it, because all the good things that are going to happen are his glory, and it's because of his grace. Verse 12, listen to me, O Jacob, even Israel, whom I called. I am he. I am the first. I'm also the last. Surely my hand founded the earth, and my right hand spread out the heavens. When I call to them, they stand together. Assemble, all of you, and listen. Who among them has declared these things? The Lord loves him. He will carry out his good pleasure on Babylon, and his arm will be against the Chaldeans. Even I, have spoken, and indeed I've called him. I've brought him and will make his way successful. Come near to me and listen to this. From the first I've not spoken in secret. From the time it took place, I was there. And now the Lord has sent me, the Lord God has sent me, and his Spirit. So once again, the command is, listen. That's because they haven't been. Not everyone who was tuned in back to verses 9 to 11 and in exile are part of the problem. There is a remnant looking forward to going back to Jerusalem. They're ready to leave. And they know about Cyrus. One of them's name is Daniel. I'm sure that a week or so after he had the little party that he read and transpired with handwriting on the wall, he went and met with Cyrus and said, hey, can I show you this in Isaiah? There's a remnant that's looking forward to going back home. There's always a remnant that believes, always. Even today, there is a remnant of Jews who love the Lord and believe in their Messiah, Jesus Christ. It's not all of them, but there is a remnant. Statistically very small. How small? At one point, it was only 8 people. And they all got on the ark. How many is it going to be in Jerusalem or in Israel at the end of the tribulation? It's going to be 1/3 of all those Jews living in Israel at the beginning of the tribulation. It's not a big number. Judah has alleged that they're loyal to Yahweh. But as we learned in verse 1, not in truth and righteousness. It's all lip service, right? Yahweh, as a means of correcting any misperceptions of who he is, proclaims the truth of exactly that you're phonies. The emphasis after the command to listen, he's the one who called Israel, not them. God initiated the relationship, not them. So for the third time in Isaiah, God tells his people, his called ones, that he's the first and he's the last. I mean, he's beating this message in. And what does Jesus say in Revelation? I am the first and I am the last. He identifies as being that same person. Yahweh is the creator God, the ruler of the universe, the maker of everything existing before anything else ever existed. Israel is not doomed to the consequences of their own failure, but because they have this status accorded by the Lord, which takes into account his name, the implications of his name and those plans, and the fact that he hasn't changed his mind, and he still called them. Yeah, he's still called them. They're still his. It can't fail. The calling is irrevocable. So the Lord says, I'm he, I'm changeless, I'm self-consistent. I'm not pressed by any external agency. I started this relationship with you. I'm going to continue with you in this relationship all the way to the end of the age. At the start, he had the freedom to do it. He still does at the end. God called them just as he called us. And there's no different. In verse 14, he tells his people that he's the creator of everything, okay? Not Baal, not Marduk, not random chance, which we like to use today, but Yahweh. He made it all. He commands his people to come together and listen to what he has to say. The way he says it is almost, this is a smaller group. It's a little more intimate. Come close. Listen to what I got to say to you. God asks the same question that he asked in the courtroom. He's the only God who tells the future. And when he does so, he's 100% accurate 100% of the time. Even down to place names, names of people, what they're going to do. I mean, there's facts written in the book of Daniel about the various rulers that'll be in Greece and in Egypt that are just mind-boggling when you start digging into it. How did he know? He does, because the Lord gave it to him. The question goes out not to just his people, but to all of us. Who among the no-gods, the fallen angels, has ever declared any of this? So he asks the question again to prove his point. God again is going to talk about that man he is going to use to deliver his people from Babylon. They don't like this. We've talked about that. They're not happy about the fact that God's going to use, and has said he's going to use, a pagan non-Jew by the name of Cyrus. But he's the foretelling, foreordaining, and fulfilling God who keeps his promises no matter what, even when the subject of his promise, the Jewish nation, is unworthy of the promise. He's going to go ahead and fulfill it. He does this again with Jesus Christ, by the way. He made a promise to all of us, too, because guess what? We're also unworthy of his promise. I love what Paul says in Romans 5. While we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Rarely would anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, perhaps someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Because you decided to stay tuned, you've just been a part of the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown. Do you know how glad it makes our hearts to know you're investing time in your relationship with Jesus? So much. In fact, would you connect with us and share a little about what's been happening in your life and how this radio ministry has affected you? The unsafebible.com has a space for you to do just that. Go to the Connect tab at the side and then click on the Connect card. Once there, fill out the form, and then we'll be sure to touch base with you. Pastor Ken's message from Isaiah today left me reflecting on my own life and how I treat people. Do I treat them how I want to be treated? Do I give them the cold shoulder when I feel like it? Or do I choose kindness over retaliation? Isaiah was one of the major prophets that confronted some of these common issues we still face today. You don't want to miss any of these teachings. Trust me. If you already have, don't sweat it. We have your bases covered. Just go to the unsafebible.com and click on Media. There you'll find this and other messages to listen to. If Go 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 is your middle name and you can't seem to find a still moment, you can follow us via Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We'd also like to personally invite you to attend one of our services. Find all the information you need, including directions, at our website. And just in case you've forgotten, it's the unsafebible.com. We hope to meet you soon. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. Come back again for more of the Unsafe Bible.